We're honored this morning to share the story of our host city, Pittsburgh, and its both struggles and successes over the last 25 years in the post-industrial age. And to lead our distinguished panel this morning, we're honored to have Morton Coleman, who was the founder, fittingly, of the Institute of Politics and directed that institute for a number of years at the University of Pittsburgh. Back in 1990, he founded this forum to bring together people from the public and private sectors, decision makers, to examine issues from economic, social, and political arenas, and both local, state, and federal interests. So it's a perfect fit to the theme of both the story of Pittsburgh as well as what we're undertaking with this Congress. And with that, I will turn the podium over to Morton.
Today's topic, Pittsburgh story. We do have a very distinguished panel. The first speaker is Donald Connor, who will present a slide presentation of the Pittsburgh story. Don is the David Lewis Director of Urban Design and Regional Engagement in the Remaking Cities Institute at Carnegie Mellon. He is also the track chairman of the Master of Urban Design at CMU, and prior to that, he was president of the Urban Design Associates, what I consider one of the great architectural firms in this country, Don. Following Don, Tom Murphy will review the role of governmental leaders in Pittsburgh's renewal and the risk involved in revitalization. Tom now is a senior fellow at the Urban Land Institute. Before that, he served 3 terms as the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, and earlier he served 7 terms in the Pennsylvania State Legislature. And he's a former community organizer in Pittsburgh neighborhoods and a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. So Tom's had every level of decision making, and now he's visited almost every city in the country, and overseas he's probably seen more cities than anybody that I know. Following him is Rick Stafford, and he'll discuss the role of business and the nonprofit community in Pittsburgh development. He's now a distinguished professor at the service professor at the Heinz School at Carnegie Mellon. Prior to that, he was chief executive officer of the Allegheny Conference, which is the major business corporate leadership group in Pittsburgh. He served many positions under Governor Thornburgh and was the chief of staff at the end of the governor's administration. Finally, we have Stanley Lowe, whose topic will be grassroots advocacy and its accomplishments and the issues of equity in Pittsburgh. Stanley was director of the Pittsburgh Housing Authority for nearly 7 years, and I know from personal experience as chairman of that board that he was instrumental in creating a whole new concept of public housing. He was the key leader in the redevelopment of the Manchester neighborhood in Pittsburgh. It was a low and moderate income neighborhood, and he did it through historic preservation. First time that a low income, moderate income neighborhood was built through historic preservation money. And he was in the forefront of the Community Reinvestment Act in Pittsburgh, and presently he's the chief executive officer of the Economic Opportunity Planning Association of Greater Toledo. So that's our panel. Let's give them a hand. Don, you're on.
Thanks, Mel. Well, good morning. Fast 10 minutes. George Ferguson gave us 120 minutes. I need 10 minutes to talk about the Pittsburgh story. My agenda, as you can see here, it's going to be in 3 parts. A little bit about the post-industrial society, what actually happened in Pittsburgh, and then lessons from Pittsburgh. The term post-industrial first was mentioned by Daniel Bell in 1973 in this book, The Coming of the Post-Industrial Society, in which he accurately forecast that the U.S. economy would move from manufacturing-based to service-based. What he did not predict was the disparities that would result from the loss of jobs and people from the industrial heartland to the south and west in the United States. By the 1980s, people were referring to post-industrial cities as shrinking cities Rust Belt cities, Frost Belt cities. All that's pejorative, of course, but just wait a minute. Sure, Pittsburgh was a dirty manufacturing city in the 1940s, but not now. And sure, Pittsburgh had streetlights on at noon in downtown in the 1940s, but not now in historic neighborhoods like the one in the north side you might have seen yesterday. And Pittsburgh is not alone in this transformation. Other cities are making the same move, but there are some inherent strengths in post-industrial cities, and we heard about that yesterday. Historic neighborhoods and downtowns, universities and medical centers, parks and cultural amenities, vacant land as an asset, and adaptable buildings, resilience and talent of the people, and abundant fresh water. Now I'd like to talk about what happened in Pittsburgh in 3 eras. There are what I would call the industrial powerhouse era, the Renaissance era, and the regrouping and transformation. The industrial powerhouse I see from the end of the Civil War till the end of World War II, kind of epitomized by the founder of my university, Andrew Carnegie, and his empire of mills and railroads and mines all across Pennsylvania and the United States. And of course, smoke did pour out of all those factories, and it was polluted. But that smoke also meant jobs, like this Coke worker, high-paying jobs. Now, in Renaissance, it is at the end of World War II, just before the end of World War II. It was determined by 2 people, Davy Lawrence, who was the Democratic mayor and boss, Democratic boss of the city, and Richard King Mellon on the right, the scion of the Mellon banking family, joined together to tackle the problems of the city, which were unique. This was a unique partnership at the time. New authorities were created, priorities were set, and public and private funds were committed. One of the accomplishments was the creation of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. They were the corporate CEOs and heads of the universities and foundations here. They commissioned studies. For instance, you can see Point State Park there in the foreground, which is now a park, but in those days was just warehouses. And the Gateway Center Towers were the first ones built in the 1950s. And so things, in a way, were going along pretty fine until the collapse of steel in the early 80s. And so overnight, factories were abandoned and people were looking for jobs. Times were indeed tough. But in the midst of all of this depression, inexplicably, and to everyone's surprise, Rand McNally named Pittsburgh the most livable city in the United States, much to the shock of Atlanta, the previous recipient, to say nothing of the snickers from coast to coast. But Pittsburgh rated high on health care, crime, cost of living, access to transit, and a lot of things. Yet there was still much to be done. There was crisis. All those jobs were gone, and people were leaving. Now we'll turn to the regrouping and transformation. And everyone here on the stage was part of that. I'm saying from 1985 till now. Let's look at 2 employment graphs here, supplied to me by the Allegheny Conference. The Great American Comeback. This is looking from 1970 to 2011, total employment. And you can see that red ski jump there that goes down to the bottom. That was the early 80s when we lost that couple 100,000 jobs very, very quickly. But you can see ever since then there's been a steady climb back to the point where we now have more employment than we did in the 1970s when we were kind of at peak employment. The second graph shows what actually happened to the regional economy. The blue graph that you can see, this is 1990 till 2012, shows goods producing employment falling, and it shows service jobs increasing. And we heard about that yesterday from Bruce and other people. Now I'd like to go through quickly lessons from Pittsburgh. And I see these 7. Dynamic leadership is important and essential. Public-private financing is key. Have a regional strategy to diversify. Bottom-up is important too. Strengthen the core, invest in education, invest in quality of life. And so we were very fortunate that we, in the wave of Davy Lawrence and Richard King Mellon, we had 2 dynamic mayors, Mayor Richard Caligieri on the left, who unfortunately died in office, and Mayor Murphy here at the right, and we'll be hearing from him shortly. This a public-private partnership. You can see on the left, Urban Redevelopment Authority, one of the first redevelopment authorities established in the United States in the late 40s. On the right are all these fabulous foundations that we have in Pittsburgh. Add to it local banks and local developers. It was a great team of people who worked together with community development corporations to do the kind of development we were talking about. Now, a regional strategy, this rather innocuous document here, Strategy 21, and it was mentioned yesterday by Paul Farmer. This, in 1985, was an amazing document for Pittsburgh. The city of Pittsburgh, the county of Allegheny, University of Pittsburgh, and Carnegie Mellon, plus the foundations and the Allegheny Conference, decided that something had to be done in '85. They'd been asking for help from Washington and Harrisburg periodically and patchwork. They said, let's go with one plan and one ask and say, this is what we really need. And guess what? They went and they got what they wanted. Their list was short but very potent. They wanted a new international airport. They wanted one of the first supercomputing centers in the United States, lower left. They also wanted the Software Engineering Institute and the National Robotics Engineering Center. That kind of was the beginning of the change of the diversity of the economy. And that was centered right here in Oakland, and just east of here in Oakland, foreground Carnegie Mellon, and the midground University of Pittsburgh and the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. I also said bottom-up was important too, and you'll be hearing from Stanley and Tom in particular about community organizing in Pittsburgh. But especially in the 1990s, we saw a resurgence of people, the resilient and the strong people saying in their neighborhoods, in our new towns, we've got to do something for ourselves. So all of a sudden initiatives started coming up from below, including young people moving into older neighborhoods and arts groups starting and community groups. That was a very important part of what we were talking about. Many of the other things were top-down, as we said. Strengthen the core. We were able to retain PPG headquarters, Alcoa, U.S. Steel, Heinz, all these headquarters were still here. But it wasn't just about these corporate headquarters. It was also about Market Square, which some of you saw. 3 years ago, you didn't want to go there. Today, it's a great European-like piazza. On the right is an infill neighborhood, Crawford Square, right near the city of Pittsburgh, that was 20 years vacant until the 1980s and 90s when it became an infill neighborhood. We're also investing in education. That was the next to last lesson. On the left, we learn from other people. The Kalamazoo Promise in Kalamazoo, Michigan is attracting middle-class families back to the city because of a promise of scholarships for kids who go through the school. We're 4 years into the Pittsburgh Promise. They get $40,000 if they have a good grade point average and they've had 90% attendance. And we have increased our graduation rate in those 4 years from 63% to 71%. And lastly, the quality of life. And it's extraordinary, the investment that's to be done here. And Tom was part of this, absolutely. We took pride in network trails, riverfront recreation, new urban parks, and the creation and expansion of the cultural district. But despite these accomplishments, I would say that all is not well. And you heard that last night from David, from his heart. As much as he wants to be the Chamber of Commerce, and I want to be the Chamber of Commerce, we can't be that. Because, in fact, we have abandoned storefronts in neighborhoods, in the city, and in the mill towns. We have poverty. It requires us to have food banks. We have racial disparities. We have an underfunded transit system. We have a $3.6 billion overhang in our sewer system, and 30% of our bridges that George talked about yesterday are deficient, and we don't have the money to make that all work. But these are problems, I think, that most of our post-industrial cities share with us. Yet of all these cities, now I'll be the Chamber of Commerce, of all these cities, Pittsburgh, after the economic collapse 30 years ago, stands today as an exemplary model of the transformation of a legacy post-industrial city. Thank you.